Marriage, time, and how to handle both, put both together. Sometimes it just doesn't feel like there is enough time. I've worked with drill sergeants, I've worked with recruiters, and one of the common complaints from spouses and even the soldiers themselves is it just takes so much time to be successful at this job. The thing that makes recruiting different is that not only does it take a lot of time, but it's also unpredictable as well. You're dealing with young kids, and who knows when they're going to call, and you're going to need you to help them out or through something. So you got long hours, unpredictable hours. Soldiers' challenge: how do I balance time for me, because you still need time for you, the mission, and my family? And there's just not enough hours of the day. The spouses or the family's challenge: how do I get enough time with my husband or with my wife or my mom or my dad without kind of being a nag or looking like the villain because I'm always complaining? So there's kind of mutual frustration. I've even heard it said, I wish he was deployed, because when he was deployed, I knew he was gone. I still have to clean up after him now, his dirty dishes, his dirty laundry, all of that different stuff. When he was deployed, he was just gone. We dealt with it as hard as it was. How do we work through this issue? Well, we cannot add hours or minutes to the day. We can't do that. We really can't scrape off from the mission if we're going to be successful, because the mission is important. We really shouldn't scrape off from the family, and you still need to sleep. And so, we're kind of at this position where there's, something's going to give, but nothing can give. And so there's this frustration that I think a lot of soldiers and recruiters have. It's like, I'm struggling at work to make numbers, and I'm not doing well at home because I'm not spending enough time. And so this kind of compounding failure can be a painful and almost like a contagious kind of thing, where it's just like failure spreading throughout my whole life. So I want to make a couple of observations, maybe a couple of things that, TTPs, if you will, that you can kind of bring into your life that might help you kind of deal with this very challenging, very, very challenging situation. And I want to share a couple of observations about a story from the Gospel of Mark. It's an encounter that Jesus had with an elderly widow. There's a connection. It might seem weird, but there's a real powerful connection at first. So it's from Mark chapter 12, beginning with verse 41. And it's called the Widow's Offering. And it says this. It says, Jesus went over to the collection box in the temple and sat and watched as the crowds dropped in their money. Many rich people put in large amounts. Then a poor widow came and dropped in 2 pennies. He called his disciples to him and said, I assure you, this poor widow has given more than all the others have given, for they gave a tiny part of their surplus, but she, as poor as she is, has given everything she has. And so it's this story. This woman puts in 2 cents, if you will, into an offering plate compared to people who are throwing 20s in there. And Jesus points out the woman who gave 2 cents and says she gave the most because she gave out of her need, or she gave out of her lack, and whereas everybody else was just giving, kind of scraping off the top. So there's 2 characters to consider in our application to our lives as recruiters and family and leaders of families. Number 1, there's the widow. The widow in this story. The widow had very little, but she gave what she had. And this, if you can kind of smell what the rock is cooking, this is the recruiter. This is the soldier. You must be like the widow. Hello. Though you don't have a lot of time, you need to give what you do have. Though you don't have a lot of time, and we all recognize that, you still need to give what you do have. And there's 3 things about this widow I want you to consider. Before you give your time, remember this. Number 1, you do need to make it sacrificial. She gave all she had. It pained her. It hurt her. It left her with the question of how is she going to get through this situation if she doesn't have this. And I think also in you giving of your time, if you're just giving 5 minutes off the top and saying, hey, that needs to be good enough, you're not giving sacrificially. And so as the widow gave sacrificially, I do think soldiers and recruiters need to do the same thing as well. And it might take a little bit of faith. I'm not sure how I'm going to get this time back, but I'm going to give it. Number 2, is make it unconditional. You know, the widow didn't say, hey, here's 2 cents, can I have 1 cent back in change? She didn't ask for a favor in return. There was no quid pro quo, you know, when it came to the widow giving her offering. And I think the same thing needs to be when we, as soldiers or recruiters, give our time to our families. If we give it and there's a string attached to it, then I don't think we're giving it in the same spirit as the widow did. I don't even think you're giving your time if you give with strings attached, because then it's more like an exchange. You're selling your time as it was a commodity and not a gift. And so the widow, Jesus lauded, praised the widow because she did give sacrificially, number one. Number two, she gave unconditionally. And then number three, she made it intentional. You know, it's not like she just reached into her pocket and said, hey, here's whatever change is in my pocket. You know, I really believe, as I kind of think about this story, that the old woman at home looked at those 2 cents and said, on Sunday in church, I'm going to put that in the offering. It was an intentional act. It was not this spontaneous whatever. And I think the same thing needs to be with us, with our time. Let's think through. Let's be intentional about it. Maybe even put it on the calendar on this day. You know, or at this time, you know, I will spend an hour, 2 hours with you. So kind of plan it out. You know, for example, in what works in the Sousa house is that after dinner, at least a couple nights a week, I go for a walk with my wife, and sometimes my kids come along as well. But that is kind of like our little time to bond. And even if I have something else going on between church and school that I'm in and work and all of those different things, we have that moment, we have that time, even if it is 20 to only 25 minutes. It's our walk after dinner. What do you do? Is there something that you and your spouse do to just snatch time and take advantage of time? If there is, leave a comment below, because maybe another recruiter or a soldier is going to read this, and maybe it might be a good idea for them. You know, kind of like share our best practices, what works for you. But what worked for the widow was that she gave sacrificially, and Jesus praised her for it. She gave unconditionally, and Jesus praised her for it. And then she gave intentionally, and Jesus praised her for it. So recruiters, soldiers, here's what you need to do. If I want to give you the hard sell, you know, in order to do your part in this time thing. And I know I've been maybe pushing a little bit, but now I'm about to turn the tables a little bit. If the widow represents the recruiter, then the other main character in this story is Jesus. Jesus represents the spouse and the family. Now, if your recruiter, husband or wife, child, goes through the steps we just talked about and gives you their time intentionally, sacrificially, unconditionally, then I think that you need to be, as they were like the widow, you need to be like Jesus. And you need to, as Jesus demonstrates in this little passage, Jesus received the offering. He didn't just receive the offering, he valued the offering, even if it wasn't much. He received it as if it was $1 million. Jesus said, you know, other people might have given more, but you, widow, I know that you did not have much, and so I receive it, and in that I honor you. Spouse, others may have more time to give their spouses, but you know your spouse. And if that spouse has given sacrificially, unconditionally, and intentionally, then I think it's your call to receive it, and not just receive it, but honor it. Not just honor it in your heart, but if you look at verse 43, it says that Jesus called his disciples, and he told them about it. You know, Jesus honored her verbally in front of others. What if you did the same thing with your spouse? What if you honored your soldier and recruiter who's really trying to give the best of their time, as little as they have, to the family? What if you did that in front of your children? And you said, you know, kids, mom and dad is so amazing. They're so busy. They have so much going on. And look at the time that they're spending with us. Oh, I'm so blessed. We're so happy. This is a wonderful thing. Here's what I've learned, and my wife has played this this leadership tool on me, if you will. I tend to rise to the level that my wife talks about me. So if my wife is going around saying what a wonderful husband and father, and thankful for all the time I'm spending with them, even if it's not a lot, I tend to rise up to that space. I want to act like the way she's talking about me. So if she's lifting me up like this, I'm motivated to kind of act that way. I've had leaders do the same thing. I had a battalion commander who used to say, "This is the best chaplain on Fort Jackson," to everybody that he met. And I felt like, man, I need to operate at that level. But if my wife, and not often, but there have been times where she's like, "Oh man, talking down and, you're not meeting the standard," kind of thing, I tend to kind of want to act in that space too. Well, if she thinks I'm that way, I'm going to act that way. And so that we kind of rise and sink to the level people talk about us. And so if your spouse hears you as mom or dad talk to your kids and say, "Well, how wonderful, your father or your mother is for spending this time," they might kind of act in that way, which is really what you want in the first place. So it works with kids as well. I think your kids will kind of rise or sink to the level you talk about them, and so as your subordinates do as well. But that's kind of a free leadership tool for you. So anyways, time is an incredibly difficult nut to crack. And, it's like we're asking to slice off from places we can't slice time off. So we look at the story of Jesus and the widow as kind of our inspiration. And recruiter and soldier encourage you to be like the widow and give sacrificially and give unconditionally and give intentionally. And then family members, if you're watching this, I encourage you to be like Jesus and receive it in the spirit in which it was given. It might not solve all the problems, but it's certainly a good foot forward in dealing with this time issue. So that being said, appreciate your time this week. Want to get to start talking about failure, and I will be talking about failure soon. I'm kind of studying up on that now. Walk in peace and have the best day possible.